The next scene takes us to the open sea, where a lone boat is sailing through the waters. On board are Maggie and her fellow witches, making their way towards the border town. Maggie seems to be having a blast as a seagull, and the boat's captain is blown away by Maggie's ability to transform into different birds. He's especially surprised that she can also inherit each bird's skills, like how seagulls can navigate the sea effortlessly and even detect storms. Sylvie, a charming witch with green silky hair, agrees and notes that without Maggie's help, they wouldn't have had the courage to take a new route around the endless cape and dock south of Grey Castle. That's when the captain bursts out laughing, saying that even though Maggie looks exactly like a seagull, he can still tell her apart by the shape of her body. Sylvie raises an eyebrow and notes that she never noticed it, because she claims that she tends to observe things more directly. Well, considering she's one of the witches who can see through fake identities, lies, and all that stuff, it's obvious she does not distinguish between people through their body features. Sylvie then glances at the ship's crew and notices that they look exhausted, so she politely asks the captain to switch their shifts. The captain is amazed that she can pick up on such subtle details. It seems nothing escapes the sharp eyes of Sylvie. As the captain rushes over to get his crew to stop slacking off, Sylvie's mind drifts back to the last conversation she had with Princess Tilly. Tilly had told her that their trip to the border town wouldn't just be about connecting with their sisters and offering help. Sylvie also had a task to uncover Roland Wimbledon's true identity. If there was anything suspicious about him, Tilly had ordered Sylvie to work with the Witch Union to expose his true self. Right now, Sylvie's worried that in the worst-case scenario, the Witch Union might not cooperate with her. They could end up imprisoning her and her crew just to keep Roland's false identity under wraps. She notices other witches goofing around on the ship. Even though everyone seems happy, Sylvie can't shake the feeling that things might not be as easy as they appear. We also spot Molly, who's having a blast and is excited that they're almost at their destination. On the other hand, a little witch with 2 ponytails looks miserable. She can hardly believe they've been swaying on this boat for a week and is amazed she's still holding on. The captain reassures her, saying she'll feel better once they hit solid ground. He adds that he's never seen anyone die from seasickness before and tells her to hang in there. Ash then turns to the little girl and comforts her, saying that Maggie has already alerted everyone in the border town, so everyone should be here to pick them up soon. The little girl curiously asks if Ash and Molly aren't going to the border town, to which Ash explains that she and Molly just tagged along to ensure their safety at sea. After dropping them off, they'll head back immediately since Princess Tilly needs their help on the island as well. Ash warns the girls to stay away from Roland Wimbledon as much as possible. The little witch then curiously asks her senior why they should be afraid of him since he's just Princess Tilly's brother. Ash agrees he's her brother, but makes it clear that being royalty doesn't mean the prince isn't a creep who likes groping witches. While everyone's busy chatting about the prince, Sylvie notices something rising into the sky from the mountains, and she's absolutely shocked by what she sees. The crew's expressions are priceless as they wonder what kind of giant bird it could be. The little witches turn to their senior, asking if she's ever seen anything like it before. The senior admits that this is the first time she's come across something like this. As they approach, Sylvie's heart swells when she sees a welcome banner fluttering in the air. It's clear the Witch Union is greeting them warmly, and the banner's message clearly says, "Border Town welcomes everyone," which just leaves Sylvie momentarily speechless. When the ship finally reaches the shore, Wendy takes the opportunity to greet everyone warmly and welcome them into Border Town. While Ash remains calm and composed around Wendy, the other witches behind Ash still look quite nervous. Wendy and Ash exchange greetings, and Anna soon arrives on the scene. As Sylvie's eyes land on Anna, she notices that all the magic around the witches seems to be gravitating towards her. The sheer amount of power radiating from Anna blows her mind, making her realize just how extraordinarily powerful our girl Anna truly is. While some witches are busy exchanging greetings, others are eyeing the giant hot air balloon with curiosity. Wendy takes the opportunity to fill them in on all the details about hot air balloons. Wendy then asks Ash if she's sure she won't come to town, since the prince is eager to see them again. Ash laughs it off, joking that the prince definitely won't be thrilled to see someone who plans on poaching his witches. She says she's leaving the kids in her friend's capable hands. Wendy, ever the big-hearted woman, or I dare say big booba lady, quickly agrees and assures Ash she'll take good care of them. With that, lightning pushes all the new witches into the balloon. While Sylvie is still feeling a bit anxious, Anna simply snaps her fingers, and black fire erupts, propelling them up into the sky. Molly waves a final goodbye from the ground, and the girls above in the air take off, heading toward their new home. Up in the sky, Lightning quickly asks the newcomers to show off their powers, while Wendy checks in with Sylvie to see if she's feeling all right. Sylvie replies that she's fine, but admits to having a bit of a headache. Well, it seems like she is feeling more than a surge of pain inside her. She curses herself for instinctively activating her magic eye. She hadn't expected to see so much land at once, and it's the first time she's taken in such a wide view, overwhelming her magic. Wendy advises her to take a few deep breaths, reminding her that everyone feels a bit strange the first time they lift off into the air. Sylvie thanks her and reassures Wendy that she's feeling better already. Meanwhile, the other girls are having a blast as Lightning enthusiastically sings about their prince's heroic deeds, cheerfully narrating all the adventures they've had together. Seems like Sylvie has finally started to relax, realizing the mood is more laid back and fun than she expected, and she hopes it stays that way forever. When they finally arrive above Border Town, the balloon lands near the castle, and the girls are absolutely shocked when they hear the resounding boom of cannons firing. Lightning quickly reassures them, explaining that the prince fired the cannons just to welcome them. Soon after, witches from the Witch Union arrive to greet the newcomers. Sylvie is blown away by the fact that their magic is completely different from what she had expected. She can't help but take note of how friendly the Union sisters have been so far, though she reminds herself to stay on guard just in case. Once they enter the dining hall, they see a feast already laid out on the table. The prince warmly welcomes everyone to Border Town, introducing himself as the ruler of the Western region, and tells them to make themselves at home. While the other ladies are overjoyed to see the feast before them, Sylvie is absolutely blown away by what she is seeing before her. She notices that the prince isn't wearing any stone of divine judgment, and there's no trace of magic inside him. This tells her that the man in front of them is indeed Roland himself, not disguised or controlled by magic. After a hectic day, we find the prince gulping down some delicious wine, letting out a satisfying burp as he leans back on his bed. He's so excited about the witch's arrival that he can't even sleep, so he's drinking to help himself doze off. The prince addresses the newcomers as sisters and asks if their accommodations have been arranged. However, Nightingale isn't too thrilled about him calling them sisters right off the bat, warning him that he shouldn't trust them so quickly. The prince asks Nightingale why she's so cautious, to which she reveals that the witch named Sylvie was speaking half-truths. Although there was nothing malicious in her words, she was very careful in how she chose them. The prince nods, understanding her point. He speculates that Sylvie is likely trying to determine if he really is the true Roland Wimbledon. He reminds Nightingale that if one of her family members completely changed their personality, she'd also wonder if they had been replaced or controlled. This is exactly what Tilly thinks of him, since back in the capital, Roland was notorious for being a lousy slacker and an easy target for bullying. This makes Nightingale curious as well, wondering if the prince is truly Roland Wimbledon. The prince responds that he is indeed Roland, but at the same time, he's not. Nightingale, with her keen sense, quickly sees that the prince isn't lying and asks him why he isn't. The prince grins and simply says that this is just how it is, and there's nothing to lie about. Nightingale just shrugs and says that as long as he remains the Roland she knows, she's fine with it. The prince nods plainly, saying he's always been himself since the day he met her. The next morning, all the newcomer witches are lined up before the prince, greeting him with an anxious, "Good morning." The prince tells them to relax, assuring them that he's not big on formalities, so they can call him whatever they call Tilly. He then explains that he won't assign them any work during their first week. They should take the time to get accustomed to the town's environment and explore Border Town as much as they want. He guarantees that no one will mistreat them or kidnap them for being witches. He reassures the nervous ladies that he has already removed the church's influence from the western region, so this place is as free as Slumber Island, a place of freedom for everyone. The prince continues by assuming the newcomers already know the basics of anti-phase and maturity, so he directly explains that there will be basic lessons after dinner, covering reading, writing, mathematics, and natural sciences. Their salary will be 1 golden royal per month, with weekends off and paid vacations. If they have any questions, they can ask Wendy for clarification. Once the administrative details are out of the way, the prince dives into the most exciting part of the meeting. He's eager to see the witch's abilities firsthand, as Tilly's description was a bit vague. He decides to go outside to start the demonstrations. As he stands up from his seat, Sylvie interrupts to add something. She presents a few pieces of paper and explains that Princess Tilly discovered these ancient texts at a ruin site near the bay, and there's also a letter included with them. The prince starts reading the letter and quickly becomes anxious. As we already know, the letter reveals some serious and concerning information related to what Tilly encountered at the ancient ruins near the bay. Once Prince is done reading, Lady Scroll confirms that the text in the letters matches exactly with the book Kara retrieved from the Eastern Forest ruins. This revelation piques everyone's curiosity, including the prince's, who reflects on the details in the letter about the man-made island with unpredictable tides, the ancient telescope, and the stone door on the sheer cliff. He finds these elements incredible and is puzzled by the existence of such strange ruins at the bay. Lady Scroll agrees with Princess Tilly's assessment, pointing out that the ruins were created by the same people, given the consistent scripture and language. She's concerned about why the church would have built these structures and then abandoned them. Wendy adds that it's not just these ruins that are mysterious. Records older than 450 years have been wiped out. She's baffled about what might be hidden there, or why there's such a concerted effort to erase these historical records. The prince says that since Tilly's already been working on deciphering the texts, he's pretty sure she can crack them. To give her a hand, he'll tell her about the holy city of Tequila and send her some photos of the devils Soraya took, as those might help with the translation. He points out that keeping this info hidden is pointless, and it's better to be prepared and understand what's going on, which might even reveal some weaknesses of the church. Because if the church did not care about these ruins, they'd have buried their history even deeper. He also suggests checking out the stone tower in the misty forest again, where lightning once found a devil. Maybe there are more clues there. He adds that once the armies got their new weapons, they'll clear out the forest just in case there are any other devils hanging around. First up, the prince wants to test everyone's powers. They head out to the empty backyard where Lotus, the first witch, shows what she's got. She pulls a giant boulder out of the earth with ease. The prince is seriously impressed, noting that despite being around the same age as Nightingale, Lotus looks incredibly young, just like a freshly picked cucumber. Her abilities are super strong too. She can terraform within a 5-meter radius without breaking a sweat. But when she tries to stretch the mud tower beyond 7 or 8 meters, the tower she creates starts to collapse due to structural imbalance. Also, she uses less magic if the dirt is looser, but her ability is good for solid ground like the slumber island she came from, while the dirt houses she might build in the border town are just going to collapse. Lady Scroll also explains some nerdy details about her power. It's a summoning type, no extra frills, and she can terraform up to 5 meters. The stones of divine judgment hit her hard, but they don't affect anything she's already built. Next up is Honey, who just hit maturity last winter. Her main gig is animal subordination. She can tame any animal and make it follow her commands to the best of its ability. Her control lasts until the animal finishes its task, or she dissolves it herself. Plus, she's got this cool extra ability called Animal Messenger, where she can send animals off to find even more powerful ones to tame. The catch is that all her powers are affected by the stones of divine judgment, and the bigger the animal, the more magic it takes to tame it. Then there's Evelyn, who's about 25 or 26. She's got the wild talent of turning crude whiskey into all kinds of different alcohols, as long as she's tasted them before. She might help out with extracting ethanol, but serving a lady booze during the day is no-go. So, the prince will have to wait until dinner to get a taste of her magic. Next up is Sylvie, and the prince feels pretty uneasy around her. She has the power to see through anything within her range, even behind her back and through obstacles. Her vision is totally unobstructed, which is a bit unsettling for him. He's actually a bit envious of her ability. Imagine being able to see through clothes of any woman you want. Sylvie also has an additional ability similar to Nightingale's, where her magic can see accumulated and dissipate. Following Sylvie is Candle, who reached maturity during the last few months. Before, her powers were limited to candle lanterns, but now they're amplified. She can maintain a state of matter for a period of time. For example, if she casts her magic on an ice cube, it won't melt, even if you put it under the sun. Her power is enchanting in nature and requires direct contact with the target. The prince had a grand idea of using Candle's powers to keep molten steel hot forever. However, he soon realized it might be a bit of a stretch, because maintaining that kind of heat would require a ton of magic. The real challenge is how much magic is needed and how long it can be kept up, especially for larger volumes. Nightingale also points out that Candle's magic is pretty good, but her mana capacity is on the lower end of the scale. Still, her talent is a gem. If she can keep something in a stable state, it could seriously boost the durability of machinery made with weaker materials. So Candle's got the potential to make those machines last longer and run smoother. Once he's done examining, Nightingale asks if there are any witches the prince particularly likes. The prince replies that he thinks they're all quite good. Nightingale is shocked to hear that the prince is willing to clap all of them tonight, but he gives her a gentle bonk and explains that he's not trying to light up his night, but simply that their abilities are impressive. The prince then decides it's time to head back to the castle since the testing is over. He mentions that he has something he wants to give Nightingale after dinner. I wonder what it could be. Maybe his rod or something special. It seems like Nightingale is really looking forward to whatever the prince wants to give her tonight. When dinner time arrives, everyone enjoys a grand feast once again. What's most intriguing today is the prince's new invention, and Lightning and Maggie are eagerly anticipating what kind of ice cream or other creation he has come up with. The prince tells them that everyone will find out soon enough, but they should eat first. Nightingale feels a bit disappointed that the surprise isn't just for her, but rather something the prince has prepared for everyone. Meanwhile, the new witches are fascinated by the chopsticks. Lady Scroll explains that the prince often invents new and interesting things like perfumes, chopsticks, and ice cream, and he tests them on a witch before officially manufacturing and marketing them. The new witches fondly recall the luxurious experience of bathing with soap they had a while ago in the castle, a treat typically reserved for nobility. They can hardly believe they're living a life that rivals even that of kings, given all the amenities they're enjoying. As the witches get cozy and start feeling at home, we're skipping ahead to the end of dinner, where the prince finally grabs everyone's attention and decides to reveal what he's made. A few maidens quickly bring out wine, and the prince announces that he's starting with white wine among his inventions. Compared to the Hebrew and fruit wines they've had before, this one is the real deal with a higher alcohol content, so he advises the non-adults to stay away. Lightning protests and insists she wants to try it too, but the prince reassures her that he's also prepared something lighter, which can be enjoyed with a bit of extra ice. He presents all of the types of wines in front of Sister Evelyn, and mentions that he's heard she's been to cocktail pubs and breweries before, so he's curious to hear her thoughts. Evelyn quickly agrees, picks up a glass of wine, and takes a gulp. As soon as the wine hits her belly, she feels a slight burn in her throat, but the apple juice helps flush it out. She finds herself pleasantly surprised by the blend of floral and fruity notes in her mouth, which makes it a unique taste she's never experienced before. Next, she tries the second cup. This one has a mix of milk and honey or sugar, creating a sweetness that complements the wine perfectly. It's a match made in heaven, and she thoroughly enjoys it. Then, she moves on to the last cup. This one's pure white wine, no extras. It's got a fiery kick that rolls over her tongue and down her throat, leaving a tart zing that lingers. It's intense, but in a good way. After the tasting, Evelyn happily declares that all three wines are unforgettable. She admits that while some might not appreciate the strong flavors, true connoisseurs will definitely appreciate its richness. The prince is pleased with her feedback and explains that this was just a sample of his strongest white wine. He's planning to deepen its flavor even more and will need her to taste it again later. The next batch of maids arrives with boxes, and these gifts are only meant for adult witches. Anna receives her own box, while Nana eagerly wonders what's inside. As promised, Nightingale also gets a box, but she doesn't seem too thrilled. The prince tells them to open the boxes once they're back in their rooms. Once the witches are in their rooms, the younger witches start complaining. They feel that the prince is playing favorites and didn't bother giving them any gifts. But Lightning reminds Lily that the prince specifically said the gifts were only for the adult witches. Lily, however, remains as arrogant as ever, brushing off the reminder. While the young witches argue among themselves, Wendy starts opening her box. As soon as she lifts the lid, all the witches crowd around to see what's inside. Turns out, the prince wasn't joking about the gifts being for adults. Inside the box are bras, clearly meant for ladies with saggy hooters. The younger witches start fiddling with the bra, having no clue what the hell this thing even is. Maggie comments on how the bras seem like an incredibly large pair of goggles, while Lightning is skeptical, wondering how exactly these are supposed to be used. That's when Wendy spots a letter in the box. She opens it and starts reading it with her eyes closed. Meanwhile, Lady Moon is enjoying the soft, smooth texture of the bra, while Lightning and Maggie are still trying to figure out what's going on. It seems like the older witches have finally understood what the bras are for, and they're pretty embarrassed by the letter. It explains that bras help redistribute the weight of breasts, improve circulation, and enhance posture. The younger witches look at their own flat chests, and then at Wendy, who is sporting the largest melons ever. Even the usually arrogant Lily starts to understand why the gifts were only meant for adults. But she tries to save face, claiming she doesn't care about the bras and never did. It's clear, though, that Lily's just trying to cover up her embarrassment about not having a pair of her own. Lightning tells Wendy to take hers off because she wants to try it too, but Wendy gets flustered and quickly pushes all the younger witches out, telling them to go to sleep. She closes the door behind them, her heart still racing, and wonders why the prince gave them something like this. Nightingale confusingly questions why the prince didn't just give the bras collectively. But then, realization strikes her like a thunderbolt out of the blue. Maybe the prince gave them individually because each bra is a different size, meaning he actually paid attention to everyone's measurements. Realizing this, Nightingale bolts out of the room and rushes to Anna's room. There, she asks her about the gift. Anna proudly shows off her chest and says the bra is surprisingly comfortable, and she's already worn it and finds it quite convenient. She then offers to show Nightingale the bra, but Nightingale quickly turns her gaze away, saying she doesn't want to see. Instead, she asks if Anna thinks it's weird for the prince to give them something like this. Anna points out that the prince plans to sell these bras to the public, so he's just testing them on the witches first. The conversation shifts to discussing how the bras fit and their comfort, so we'll skip over that part. In the next scene, we see the ship sailing. Inside, the prince is speaking with Sister Lotus, asking her to raise dirt on both sides of the river to lay the foundation for a bridge. They dive into some nerdy physics and science talk, and in the end, the prince asks if she can raise the dirt over 10 meters, given the river's depth. Lotus confidently agrees, saying she'll handle it. Meanwhile, Wendy is steering the boat with her wind powers and is pleasantly surprised that her shoulders no longer hurt, thanks to the bra. She's eager to thank the prince personally for the thoughtful gift. Once they reach the perfect spot, the prince tells Wendy to stop the boat. He then instructs his fellow engineer that they need to dig a pit around the dirt that Lotus is going to pull out, and they'll fill it with concrete. The prince specifies that the pit should be no more than 5 meters in diameter and 1 meter deep. Once it's filled, the witch will lower the depth by 1 meter. If they repeat this process, they'll be able to build a concrete wall that extends down to the riverbed. Lotus uses her earth control to raise the pile of mud, and as soon as she commands it, the mud begins to pop up and stack quickly. The prince is surprised to find it easier to raise dirt through water than through sand. However, the stinky smell that follows is unbearable. He quickly deduces that the pile is composed of decomposed plants and animals, along with the waste of villagers who've relieved themselves near the river. He decides to have some people shovel the mess away. They'll need to clean it up and add layers one by one to shape it properly. The prince laments that if transportation weren't such a primary issue, he would have used the decomposing trash as fertilizer. Speaking of fertilizer, the scene shifts to a vibrant field of crops, bursting with grain. We meet a guy in a cap, known as Sirius, who admires the impressive yield. The seeds have doubled in quantity, and the grains are bigger than ever, all thanks to the witch's hard work. Sirius reflects on how, ever since the prince held the ceremony and Nana appeared on stage, the witches stopped hiding themselves. It's clear that only witches can raise soil in the middle of the river. Suddenly, 2 people rush up to Sirius, and it looks like he is not thrilled to see these guys here, because he's pretty sure they're about to ask the same old questions. As expected, they ask if it's true that they can become free citizens, own their own houses, go to school, and they will only need to turn in 70% of their harvest. They also fire off a bunch of other questions about their new opportunities and rights. Sirius casually points to the banner that says, "Labor creates wealth, and labor changes fate." He smiles and says this means if they put in the effort, they'll become free citizens just as the prince promised. And trust him, that promise is solid. When someone asks what they should do with the remaining 30% of the harvest, to which Sirius explains that you can either sell it to the prince, eat it yourself, or use it as seeds. And that's pretty much it. He goes on to explain that Bordertown doesn't allow private sales of harvest. If they try to sell it outside the official channels, they'll be breaking the law, and their harvest could be taken away with a side of punishment. But then, one of the commoners raises concern that they might get scammed by the prince. Sirius reassures them that this won't happen. The prince follows market prices, so there won't be drastic changes. The public marketplace, managed by the city hall, is the only place where grain is sold. The prince will always buy at the market rate. With that, Sirius concludes the conversation and tells them to get back to work. Another guy pipes up and asks Sirius if he knows where Miss May and Miss Eileen went, since there haven't been any stage shows recently. He's worried they might be sick. Sirius reassures them that they'll return in the fall because they can't perform in this scorching heat. Or can they? As the workers head off to their tasks, Sirius reflects on his own journey. He used to be a knight, trying to escape his father's fields, but got captured and stripped of his position in just a few months. Somehow he ended up at Bordertown. His salary is going up, there's plenty of room for advancement, and he's even come to look forward to the harvest. In the next scene, the farmers have finished harvesting all the grain and have even started burning the leftover straw. After a while, the bald advisor, who is absolutely thrilled, reports to the prince that this season's harvest is enormous. He explains that, according to the city hall's estimates, their exports are 4 times higher than before, and their best field has produced 6 times more than its previous yield. This gives them more than enough to feed all their villagers. The prince smiles at the good news, pleased to know their warehouses won't be empty anymore. The bald advisor adds that with additional workers and more farmers, they could easily support 50 to 60,000 people. This makes the old man even more turned on, as he dreams about their town growing into a city and then expanding across the entire continent. You see, in this world, city growth is pretty much limited by food supply. A big city like the capital, with 20,000 people, needs tons of surrounding villages to keep everyone fed. But with new machines our boy just produced, one person's work can now feed 10,000 people, and the big harvests in Bordertown are all thanks to Sister Leaf's improved grain. We further learn that the prince has cut back on the number of farmers without lowering the output, which means he can now focus on manufacturing. Since the agricultural team has nailed down the best farming strategies using metal tools and machines, their exports are only going to get better. In the next scene, the prince then steps up on a pedestal and gets the crowd pumped up. He knows they're dying to hear some good news, So he tells them straight up, the city hall will handle turning everyone into free citizens. You can choose to keep farming or try something else in town. Once the harvest wraps up, they'll announce the details about citizenship promotions. The crowd goes wild with cheers and praise for their prince. The prince further goes on to announce that starting next year, they'll only need to meet a quota to gain citizenship, making competition unnecessary. Basically, if you work hard, you can shed your identity as an indentured worker. As he said before, hard work creates wealth and labor changes your destiny. He hopes for a day when Bordertown is free of indentured workers and everyone is a free citizen. The whole crowd erupts in excitement, swinging their praises for the prince. The scene then shifts to somewhere unknown, where we see Timothy, a wannabe king, after a long time. He's lounging in an office room, reclining back in his chair and bizarrely sniffing the wooden table. By the smell, Timothy can tell the table is made of cerulean wood. He's surprised to find that her sister still prefers materials from Blizzard Peak, which means his sister definitely not feminine at all. A creepy smile spreads across his face, which soon turns into maniacal laughter as he gloats about having outdone his sister, Garcia. Timothy reveals that in just half a month, he's methodically taken over the Sand Nation people she left in Clearwater Port. He's confident that she's lost her grip on the southern region, and he's feeling pretty smug, knowing that the Queen of Clearwater is now history and the southern region is back under his control. Just as Timothy is savoring his triumph, one of his knights barges in. Timothy tells him he'll be heading back to the capital the next morning. The knight will handle everyone else, except for Timothy's personal guards and the capital's night squad. He instructs his knight, who goes by the name Duke Edward Haas, to keep the southern region secure and to prevent the Sand Nation from stepping into Grey Castle territory. Edward Haas asks if this means he'll be staying behind. Timothy agrees, saying there's still a lot to finish here, and he needs someone loyal and powerful to stay behind, either to deal with traitors or gather refugees. He reassures Edward not to worry. He won't be stuck here forever. Once everything in Clearwater Port is sorted, he'll make sure to bring Edward back to the capital. He explains that Grey Castle still needs to be unified, and before conquering the western region, he'll need many knights to fight. So he promises his loyal friend that he won't leave him behind. Edward looks down, saddened, and reminds Timothy that his brother Raymond Haas is missing. He asks why there's been no news about him, especially since it's been 2 months since Raymond went to the western region. Timothy reassures him that Raymond might be delayed by something, or he could be on his way back. He tells Edward not to worry about his brother for now. The focus should be on burning down Garcia's old stronghold. Timothy wants everyone in the southern region to see that Garcia's old base will be nothing but ashes. Even if she returns, it will be in ruins. He instructs Edward to just burn the soldiers who survived the church's pill's side effects. Once Timothy is alone, he reflects on how Bordertown has easily handled the demon threats, defeated Duke Ryan, and captured Longsong Fortress. He's confused by how one of the dumbest siblings is doing all this. Not only that, Rayman and his 1/500 soldiers who were deployed to the west have also completely lost contact. He's convinced that something significant must have happened in Bordertown to cause such a drastic change in his brother. Whatever the case, Timothy is determined to make his brother, Roland Wimbledon, beg for forgiveness at his feet eventually. Back in the Holy City, the Pope receives grim news about Heather's death. Despite the somber update, he remains composed and reassures his junior that Heather was a devoted, intelligent, and honest girl who will be remembered fondly. He vows that the perpetrator, Garcia Wimbledon, will face justice in due time. The Pope's concern quickly shifts to whether Garcia is collaborating with the Wolfheart Kingdom, and how Church's new poison is working against them so far. Priest Maine reports that while the poison worked as expected during the attack on Broken Tooth Forest, where it incapacitated the enemy soldiers before they could fully combat the threat, the results were less effective when used against Wolfheart City. The enemy remained strong and resilient, and Maine takes the blame for this failure. The Pope explains that the new poison was derived from demon beasts, and further highlights that there are records of 70 abilities that can counter it, with 30 capable of neutralizing it immediately. Given this, it's not surprising that a large nation like Wolfheart would have a witch with such countermeasures. The Pope shares his worry that if witches can really counter their poison attacks, it might change how people view them in Wolfheart, potentially even making them heroes. And that would be pretty bad news for the Church. He reminds Maine not to get too hung up on the losses of their judgment and divine punishment armies, as it might distract them from making important decisions, and they don't want the battle to cool down. But there's a silver lining for the Pope. Garcia and the Wolfheart forces are all gathered in one place, and he is planning to take them all out in one go. The junior has no clue how they are supposed to achieve this, so the Pope just tells his junior to follow him. As they walk through the dimly lit tunnels, a night lights up the area. The Pope shows Maine their secret weapon, which was originally intended to be used against powerful demons. It can be put to use now. He calls it City Breaker, and it runs on magic, needing 3 or 4 witches to control it. The Pope explains that the city breaker has a range far beyond catapults and ballistae. It's incredibly hard for typical city walls to defend against its steel bolts, and it can slice through wooden ships like a knife through cloth. He's confident it'll handle both Wolfheart's city walls and the Black Flag fleet with ease. When Maine asks if this weapon was developed by the secret Holy Temple, the Pope says no, and reveals shocking news that it actually came from their enemies, the Underworld's devils. That's why it's been hidden deep within their caves, and he advises Maine to keep it concealed and only use it strategically, as they don't want civilians to see the kind of monstrosity it is. The Pope says he's going to assign 2 top-notch pure witches to help out, ensuring Garcia and Wolfheart won't get away this time. Hearing that, Priest Maine's face lights up like a kid in a candy store. You see, pure witches under the Pope are the best of the best, with some seriously impressive abilities. Before Maine heads out, the Pope tells him to shed the blood of those heretics and avenge Heather. Maine quickly responds with a crisp, "Yes, sir." Back in Bordertown, Sirius reports to the prince that their current equipment won't handle all the harvest milling. He suggests setting up a steam-powered mill near the Redwater River. The prince agrees, and tells him to send a request to the city hall and draft a plan once the funds come through. Sirius also mentions that 516 people have become free citizens, and their names have been sent to the old man Baroff. With that, Sirius wraps up his report. The prince is quite happy with Sirius's performance, and is confident that Sirius will be valuable in recruiting aristocrats and knights from the fortress, given his impressive manners. Next up is Lady Scroll, representing the education sector. She reports that all the students who finished their basic studies have moved into their preferred sectors, with 5 even applying to the chemistry laboratory. It seems Prince Roland was hoping for more than just 5 recruits, as otherwise the newly built laboratories might end up sitting empty for a while. Even Kyle Sichi, the head of the chemistry department, is concerned about the low number of applicants. The prince then asks Kyle to report on his department's situation. Kyle, who isn't fond of these meetings, makes it clear that he's not into wasting time, and suggests finding a new representative for the department if this is the routine. Kyle Sichi then points out that he needs more personnel. The new assistants are young, but they're quick learners, and basic education seems to have done the trick. He also mentions that if the prince grants him access to Chemistry 201, he might finally come up with a way to manufacture acid on a larger scale. Next up is a guy in glasses, who reports on the infrastructure progress in Bordertown. He covers everything from bridges to residences and city walls. Let's not forget about Captain Ironaxe, who reports that the Second Army has finished basic training and is ready to march to Longsong Fortress whenever needed. Aside from the artillery division, all soldiers have now switched to using revolving rifles. With that, the meeting wraps up. The prince thanks everyone for their contributions and announces a raise in their salaries. From now on, department heads will receive 2 gold royals a month, and they'll increase their employees' wages accordingly as well. The prince finally announces the highlight of the day, his plan to expand Bordertown into a real city. He's talking about a massive transformation that will stretch the city west to the Badlands, east to Longsong Fortress, and south to the sea. The surrounding mountains will serve as their natural walls, making the city larger than the capital or any city in all 4 kingdoms. He emphasizes that all it will take is hard work and preparation to turn Bordertown into a metropolitan marvel that will outshine all others. Once everyone has left, the old man Baroff raises a concern. Despite the recent successful harvest, the treasury is running low on funds. After paying Margaret, the Merchant Guild, and Theo, the finances are tight, with only about 2,000 golden royals left, which is a dangerously low balance. Prince Roland reassures Baroff that income will be forthcoming, because the Margaret Guild is expected to purchase another set of steam engines soon. Also, the high-pressure canisters and hydrogen replacements will need a bit of research from the chemistry department. Once that's sorted, they plan to sell hot air balloons and hydrogen refills. They'll charge 50 royals per refill, with a free refill after every 10, which should provide a steady income stream. Speaking of the chemistry department, Baroff then points out that Kyle Sichi needs to improve his social skills, as he's often quite impolite. The prince doesn't mind Kyle's lack of social skills. After all, scientists aren't exactly known for spending much time in the fresh air. As the night deepens, Kyle Sichi, true to a scientist's nature, is still buried in his studies. He's wrestling with periodic tables and equations, though we don't need to get into the nitty-gritty details. What's clear is that Kyle is working tirelessly, determined to fill the laboratories and figure out how to manufacture acid. His main goal is to earn Chemistry 201 from the prince, although what exactly that entails is still a mystery to us. It seems Kyle has a lot riding on this, and he's pushing himself to the limit to reach his goal. The next scene takes us into a mysterious cave where the witches can be seen exploring. They suddenly stop, and Nightingale asks Sylvie if this is where the tunnel splits. Lightning jumps in with precise instructions, saying they should start at the second door, while Sylvie also adds her 2 cents to help steer the team in the right direction. After a bit of wandering, Lightning points out there's just one last door to check. Nightingale eagerly vanishes from her spot and reappears at the front, urging everyone to move further inside. Sylvie, watching this, can faintly see Nightingale's magic when she disappears, but can't quite capture her figure or movements. She remembers Tilly saying that Nightingale is the most battle-ready witch in the Union she should be aware of. It turns out the prince sent everyone into these mines because there's an old legend about an ancient beast living here. He told them to report back after their trip. Because of the danger, Sylvie reveals to us that Nightingale was specifically chosen for this task due to the legend that these mines were once the nest of an ancient beast and some miners have gone missing. Suddenly, Sister Lucia halts their journey and sits down to examine some ore she's spotted because she thinks the prince might be interested in it. After their brief detour, they finally reach door number 23, the one they'd been searching for. Sylvie steps forward, using her abilities to check it out. After a thorough scan, she can clearly sense that there are no ores here, but there are some further down. There are 4 tunnels, one of which seems to slope downwards. Lightning is intrigued by the downward slope and asks Sylvie about it. Sylvie responds that it might lead to a deposit. She also seems a bit exhausted, probably from using up her magic. Nightingale then points out that they'll never know unless they investigate further. So eventually, they reach the downward slope, which drops steeply from where they're standing. Nightingale comments that it looks pretty deep, and Lucia, feeling uneasy, mentions that she feels like someone's watching her and suggests they should hurry back once they complete their investigation. Sylvie scans the area once more and notes that there aren't any ores around, so they should probably leave. But then she notices something odd. When she tries to scan the middle path, she can't see anything. Lightning asks what that means, and if Sylvie is just tired from using her magic. Sylvie explains that she's not running out of magic, but rather something seems to be blocking her vision. Nightingale decides to check it out herself and tells the other girls to stay back. However, Sylvie quickly stops her, saying that something could be causing this effect, and going in could be dangerous. Nightingale asks what she means, and Sylvie explains that it seems like there are stones of divine judgment involved. These stones appear to be underground and stretch throughout the area. In the next scene, we see the prince arrive at the underground location with his trusted partners and is utterly awestruck by the sheer magnificence of the giant crystal before him. He turns to his knight and asks if they built the staircase. Knight Carter responds that they did not. It was already here when the First Army discovered this place. He believes it has been here for decades, possibly even centuries. Sister Lightning agrees somewhat, noting that Border Town was established around 70 years ago, so it's unlikely the staircase is related to the town's villagers or the kingdom. Carter adds that Grey Castle didn't even exist 100 years ago, so it seems implausible that anyone from centuries ago could have built it. The prince then reminds them that they do know of a group of people who lived 450 years ago and were forgotten. As the prince takes a closer look at the crystal, he remembers that glowing rocks usually have radioactive or fluorescent properties. But this stone of divine judgment doesn't seem to fit either category. If it were radioactive, the soldiers from the First Army would have been toast within minutes. And it can't be fluorescent since there are no light sources in the cave. Plus, even though these crystals act like prisms, they don't have any of the usual crystalline patterns, so he's totally baffled about how they even got here. Knight Carter is blown away, pointing out that a stone of divine judgment the size of a thumb would be worth a fortune, but something this massive could bankrupt all 4 kingdoms. Nightingale isn't thrilled with Carter's line of thinking, though. She gives him a stern look and asks if he's seriously considering handing it over to the elite just so they can use it to torture witches. Meanwhile, Lightning is fascinated by these crystals. They're the first stones of this color she's ever seen, and if they could bring one back, they wouldn't need candles anymore. But Nightingale reminds everyone that, as intriguing as the crystals might be, they're really just shackles for witches. Still, Lightning wants to take a small piece of the stone as a trophy from her exploration. The prince gives her the green light to go ahead, as long as she isn't too dismayed by it. With that, Lightning tries to crack the stone with a rock, but it doesn't even leave a scratch. Even Knight Carter is surprised because, as far as he knows, divine stones of judgment are supposed to be fragile. Lightning then starts hitting the crystal from different angles, but the result is the same. No scratches, no cracks, nothing. That's when the prince tells Nightingale to give it a try. She bombards the crystal with bullets, but it remains just as shiny and undamaged as ever. The prince is intrigued that even revolvers can't make a dent in the crystal. Carter wonders aloud how the church managed to break it down for sale if it's this tough to crack. Nightingale then points out that these stones should be pulverized with the slightest strength. Anna also chimes in with some info of her own, asking our boy if he still remembers the treasure map. She explains that one of the maps actually points to this location, not the northern mines. The prince is also shocked by this news, realizing that this cave holds a significant amount of these stones, which makes it a part of the treasure place. Once they're back in the office, the prince studies everything with Lady Scroll. He points out that it matches what he remembers, and the southernmost point does indeed align with the northern mines. Lady Scroll adds that if Anna is correct, this map could be one the church left behind while searching for new veins of stones. She's curious about why they would abandon everything after excavating it and building the stairs. The prince reveals that given the high value of stones of divine judgment, this cave certainly doesn't seem like something they'd leave behind. Since they can't go to the city of Tequila right now, he wonders if the answers might only be found when they visit the stone towers. I'm not entirely sure what is going on, but let's hope to soon connect the dots when we further dive into the story. As night falls over Border Town, the new witches chat during their study class. Evelyn asks Sister Candle if the prince assigned her any tasks. Candle nods and explains that he did give her a task. She says he asked her to use her powers on some metallic lumps to keep them solid at room temperature, but she's not sure what he plans to do with them. Candle then inquires about what tasks the prince assigned Evelyn, to which Evelyn reveals that the prince hasn't asked her to do anything specific. She's free to learn whatever she wants. Sometimes he does ask her to sample new booze, and she's given suggestions like adding water or fruit juice, but the prince seems focused on making the strongest alcohol possible. That's when the little girl mentions that the prince must have a reason for his request. But before she can elaborate, their teacher, Lady Scroll, walks in. Lady Scroll breaks the news that they won't be learning any new material today. Lightning's face lights up, excitedly asking if they're going outside, or maybe tasting some new food. Lady Scroll just smirks and shatters their hopes by announcing that she'll be giving them an exam on everything they've learned. Everyone looks confused to hear this, and wonders what this exam thing is all about. Lady Scroll explains that, after 3 months of studying, the prince thinks it's time to check their progress. They'll tackle problems in 3 subjects: language, mathematics, and natural sciences. She adds that they'll need to answer the questions on their own and can't get any help during the exam. Everyone's faces fall at the shocking news, but Lady Scroll isn't done dropping bombs yet. She announces that the prince has explicitly stated that only those who answer more than half of the questions correctly will get to enjoy ice cream during the weekend afternoons, and those who score below half will lose their tea privileges. That last line leaves Nightingale completely boggled. As a fan of afternoon teas, she's pretty sure she's in trouble. Lady Scroll adds that witches from Slumber Island are exempt from this exam and can either stay and finish or take the day off. No matter their score, they won't lose any privileges. The new witches finally breathe a sigh of relief, realizing they're not completely screwed after all. Candle turns to her friend Evelyn and asks if she's going to stay for the exam. Evelyn nods and explains that taking the exam is a good opportunity to learn. She wants to advance her abilities by gaining more knowledge, and she's been practicing her writing after class with help from Lily and Moon. She figures it's worth the effort to avoid falling behind. Hearing this, the little witch decides to join her for the exam as well. Shortly after, the exam is conducted, and the answer sheets from all the witches are sent to the prince. The prince thanks Lady Scroll for her help, and as he reviews the answer sheets, he's fascinated to find that Nightingale has passed. Well, it seems like the prince is a bit disappointed that Nightingale passed because if she had failed, he was planning to discourage her from eating more sweets during afternoon tea. Nightingale quickly catches on and starts pinching his shoulder, practically telling him not to even think about it. Jokes aside, the prince is genuinely glad that all the witches performed exceptionally well. What's even more fascinating is that 2 new witches also took the test, where Evelyn scored 5 points while Candle scored 36. The prince is especially impressed by Candle, who only attended the course for 2 weeks but still managed to score 60 points. It just proves how witches, both physically and mentally, have a significant advantage over commoners. The next scene shows Lucia practicing hard with the materials inside her pouch. That is when her little sister wanders in and asks why she's still practicing so late. Lucia loses her concentration due to the sudden interruption and gets annoyed at her little sister, telling her to focus on reading the books instead of bothering her. But the little one replies that she can't really understand the words completely. She can only read a bit at a time and wishes she could read and write as well as her big sis. Lucia explains that's why she needs to practice more. She tells her sister that words have similar structures, and you can figure out their meanings from their roots. It's all part of the learning curve. The little girl reluctantly grabs a book and goes back to reading. Just then, Nightingale shows up and notices the sibling squabble. The little girl quickly rushes over to Nightingale with a pleasant smile and says she's just reading some books while her sister is busy practicing. Nightingale then offers ice cream to both sisters, and they eagerly grab their sweet, delicious treats. As they enjoy their ice cream, Lucia points out that these goodies are usually only distributed after noon tea time, so she is curious how Nightingale managed to get her hands on them. Nightingale proudly boasts that she placed 3rd in the exam, just behind Leaf and Wendy, Since the prince didn't expect her to pass, she figured she'd try to get something extra from him. Lucia then asks how many points she herself scored, to which Nightingale reveals Lucia got around 68 points. Lucia's face falls a bit at this, since there were 120 points total, and she only scored a little more than half. As her mood sinks, her melting ice cream starts to drip, and a drop of creamy sweetness lands on her hand. Nightingale quickly grabs Lucia's hand and licks the sweet nectar off, reassuring her that she did fine. She explains that Lucia hasn't been studying with them for long, so it's perfectly reasonable to miss a few questions in math and science. The banter among the ladies continues, and the little girl cheekily asks Nightingale if she likes princes. Her big sister panics and quickly shushes her, saying she shouldn't ask such blunt questions. Nightingale blushes but admits that, yes, she does like him. The scene shifts to Roland's office, where Lucia presents the ore samples she collected from the northern mine. The prince thanks her for her help, and Lucia says it's all worth it if she can be even a little bit helpful to him. As the prince examines the ores, Lucia's thoughts drift back to Nightingale's confession. She admits to herself that she doesn't really understand romance or whatever it is, but the idea of a witch being interested in the prince seems impossible to her. She thinks it's best if witches keep their feelings to themselves and not let others know. Meanwhile, the prince finishes examining the ore and tells Lucia that he'll have Sishi take a look at it. He suggests that Lucia keep practicing her abilities at the mines and to ask Anna if she needs any help with anything. Lucia feels a bit confused that even the prince can't identify the ores. But then, the prince calls her name, and she perks up at the sudden attention. The prince congratulates her on passing the exam and reveals that she placed 9th with 68 points. He acknowledges that it's impressive to perform well after only studying with everyone for a month and encourages her to keep up the good work. Lucia brightens at the praise and agrees with a big smile, feeling more motivated and happy about her progress. After a while, the prince lets out a sigh, feeling disappointed that he couldn't identify the ores in the mine even after purifying them. He realizes there's still a huge gap between engineering and geology, and wonders if he should leave it to the alchemist, as chemical experiments are more reliable than observing things with the naked eye. Also, he does not have any time to stress anything, since it's already time he starts planning countermeasures for the months of demons. Suddenly, a reporter rushes into the office with an urgent report. There's a secret letter from the capital. The prince asks who sent it, and the reporter says there's no signature. The prince opens the letter and sees that it's unsigned and written in an unrecognizable handwriting. It doesn't take him long to deduce that this secret letter must be from Theo, who has done a good job hiding his identity. As the prince squints at the text, he reads that an army of 1,000 strong has left the capital and is heading towards the western region. The next scene opens to the resounding claps and cheers from the audience, celebrating the stellar performance of the stage actors. In the background, a newcomer asks Lady May if she performed really well. Lady May acknowledges that she has indeed improved a lot. Another little girl chimes in, hoping for some encouraging words from her senior as well. However, Lady May breaks her junior's heart by dropping the bombshell that she's still far behind and needs to work on her emotions. Another stage worker points out that Lady May seems pretty strict, especially since the audience enjoyed their performance so much. The senior reminds the stage worker that many of these audience members are commoners who've never experienced theater before, so it's a new experience for them. She adds that if their audience were elite members, their stage mistakes would have gotten them into serious trouble. Suddenly, another actor makes her entrance without missing a beat. She immediately begins berating Lady May and her crew, labeling them as third-rate actors performing in a rundown place like Border Town. Lady May's student is visibly annoyed by this, but the arrogant woman, known as Bella Dean, mocks them further. She questions if they even know their place and makes it clear that none of them are suited for a big city like Longsong Fortress. She emphasizes that the Longsong Theater doesn't welcome third-rate actors. She even sneers at their play, The Diary of a Witch, dismissing it as terrible and unworthy of attention. She continues her rant, accusing Lady May of causing a drop in the theater's revenue due to performing in such a filthy town. According to her, no noble would want to watch shows from a theater that also performs for commoners without charging any price, and these commoners are nothing more than monkeys in her eyes. But Lady May isn't having any of it. She shoots back, making it clear that Bella's being arrogant and clueless. She points out that the theater manager has a deal with Prince Roland and Ambassador Petrov, who are in charge of Longsong Fortress. She assures Bella that any revenue lost will be covered by Border Town. She further tells Bella to get a grip and stop running around like a headless chicken, because this is a business deal after all. And as for reputation, Lady May proudly adds that only second-rate actresses would worry about losing theirs. Back when she performed in the capital, the elite couldn't get enough of her shows. Lastly, she drops the bombshell that The Diary of a Witch was written by Prince Roland himself. So, by trash-talking the play, Bella is not just dissing some random script, She's showing contempt for royalty, which, by the way, is punishable by law. But Bella continues her rant, which eventually leads to a sharp slap across her face from Lady May. After delivering the slap, Lady May takes a deep breath, letting out the frustration that had been bubbling inside her. Miss Bella's lackeys quietly warn May that she's crossed the line by slapping her fellow actress. They remind her that an actress's face is her most valuable asset, and she can't just go around slapping people. Although Lady May inwardly admits that she acted on impulse, she still has no intention of apologizing to this trashy woman. She also recalls her time with Prince Carter, noting how men may seem all muscular and strong, but their weaknesses are in their eyes and throats. If it comes down to dealing with these lackeys, she's confident she could drop them with a single kick. So she doesn't falter and steps up to confront them. But just then, Prince Carter shows up. He announces that he's here to arrest anyone who insulted Prince Roland or schemed against his theater crew. Bella and her two lackeys are shocked to see the prince's knight, and Bella is pretty sure they're screwed since she was the one who belittled the prince's play. Later that night, Knight Carter and Lady May have a great time together, chatting and enjoying each other's company. But we are not interested in their lovey-dovey shit, so let's jump ahead 2 days. Inside the castle of Bordertown, representatives from the 5 families have gathered from around the western region. Prince Roland reveals that he has received reliable intel indicating that Timothy has sent soldiers to Longsong Fortress. Their numbers are unclear, but there's no doubt they're coming for Bordertown. He explains that Timothy's typical strategy involves kidnapping commoners to bolster his forces, then making them eat the church's drug. This drug, known as the Evil Crimson Pill, grants commoners strength even greater than that of knights, but its side effects are fatal and irreversible. Timothy plans to weaken the Western region's power by turning anyone useless to him into drugged berserkers, making everyone here in danger. As the leader of the Western region, Prince Roland instructs all the representatives to mobilize their personnel into the fortress. By doing so, Timothy won't be able to strengthen his forces. One of the members raises a concern, pointing out that they don't have enough food and supplies to sustain such a move. But Prince Roland makes it clear that they'll have to bring everything they can, and they only have 3 days to do that. Every commoner must be transported to the city, and once Timothy's soldiers are defeated, they can return home. All the representatives kneel in respect, and once they're gone, Prince Roland turns to his army captain, Iron Axe, and explains that this army is different from the last one they faced. Timothy's soldiers are currently sailing down the Redwater River, planning to infiltrate through Willowtown. He explains that this route is especially tricky because once they pass the river fork, they'll have the option to attack the fortress's south and east gates, or continue west to lay siege on Bordertown. To avoid spreading their troops too thin, Prince Roland emphasizes that they need to focus their best soldiers on ambushing the enemy at the Redwater River Fork, as it's the most strategic point for a successful defense. He further explains that Lightning and Maggie will keep an eye on the enemy's movements, so they don't need to station extra soldiers for defense. Instead, they just need to set up an ambush for a single decisive strike. He also notes that Longsong Fortress will need 100 soldiers to watch over the aristocrats, so he doesn't want any surprises while everyone's focused on the Redwater River. Iron Axe will handle the artillery and board the ship at Littletown to meet him at the river fork, and our boy himself will rush there as soon as he's done with things at the fortress. Nightingale, looking worried, asks if the prince is really planning to go himself. The prince nods, saying no one else knows how to handle the witch's abilities like he does, so it's crucial for him to be there. Once their boat sets sail, we see all the new witches, along with our 2 familiar girls, on board. Leading this operation is our eager prince, who makes it clear that while he might not be a master at commanding large armies or planning full-scale assaults, he definitely knows his stuff when it comes to tower defense and tank warfare, which is his specialty. The camps are set up near the river, and just as the prince is about to drop some knowledge on what tanks actually are, Nightingale chimes in, saying she gets the idea of trenches and towers, but has no clue what in the world a tank is. That's when our boy explains that tanks are like carriages with cannons mounted on them, even sketching out a rough drawing in the sand for everyone to see. But then he admits they don't have enough horses, and the cannons also need to be transported with the ships as well. So the prince concedes that what they have isn't really a tank. But he suggests that if they don't have enough horses, Honey could tame some tigers or cougars to pull the cannons instead. Nana then asks if cannons pulled by tigers still count as tanks. The prince, with a grin, proudly says yes and even suggests they could call them tiger tanks or leopard tanks. That's when Lotus speaks up, asking the prince what her role will be in the battle against the fake King Timothy. The prince explains that they need to set up 2 perimeters on either side of the river. He draws a line in the sand to show the enemy's route and points out where their troops will be stationed on both riverbanks. The plan is to launch a surprise pincer attack, and to hide everyone, they'll need to build dirt structures in a V shape along the banks. These structures should be long with sturdy walls, and each will have 8 rooms with one small window facing the river. Lotus appears to be still confused, and says that while they can hide their troops in the mud houses, they won't be able to attack the enemy's ships. If the ships don't stop or dock, they might just sail past. The prince reassures her, saying she doesn't need to worry about that. He explains they've got all sorts of long-range weapons for dealing with the ships. He also mentions that Leaf will use wild grass and vines to camouflage their setup. The prince can almost hear the victory music playing in his head. It's just a matter of time before Wendy transports all 16 cannons into the mud houses they're about to build. With that firepower, no matter how many ships Timothy has, they'll be at a serious disadvantage against his attack. The enemy won't stand a chance. The next day, a knight starts barking orders for all soldiers to get ready for the attack. Hearing the command, the soldiers quickly scramble into the bunkers, which are completely camouflaged under a thick layer of grass, thanks to Lady Leaf's work. Inside the bunkers, the soldiers start prepping their cannons, and they can't stop singing the praises of the witches. They're amazed at how the witches built huge structures overnight and instantly summoned grass and vines. They're even hearing rumors about one witch who can turn into a giant pigeon. The soldiers can't believe how these extraordinary abilities surpass anything mere mortals can do. Just as the soldiers are chatting and having a good time, someone reports that enemies are closing in. The soldiers rush to load the cannons, ready to spring into action at Miss Lightning's signal. The ships are definitely getting closer, and Sylvie confirms they're almost at the ambush point. Lotus is a bit anxious as the boats appear on the horizon, and the prince has not yet made a move. But then, bam! The ships are hit from all sides by a barrage of cannon fire. Lotus is completely blown away by the sudden and intense bombardment. The soldiers on the ships are completely helpless, dropping like flies under the relentless cannon fire. Lotus is still trying to wrap her head around what's happening, her mind spinning trying to understand how they're pulling this off. With people crying for help and blood everywhere, Sylvie quickly starts feeling queasy from the chaos. Lotus rushes to check on her friend, while the prince, observing the carnage, advises Sylvie to take a break. He offers her a handkerchief, which she accepts gratefully. Sylvie notes that these weapons are probably the incredible invention she had heard rumors about. She hadn't taken it too seriously at the time, but now she can't deny the power of such a weapon. Suddenly, the surviving knights from the ships scramble onto the solid ground, raising their swords and charging at the beach flanks. But let's be real, these knights are marching straight into their doom. Our soldiers, ready and waiting in the bunkers, start hammering the knights with gunfire. The enemy quickly realizes they've been ambushed and scrambles back to their ships, beginning their retreat in a hurry. Meanwhile, the prince watches the whole thing through his telescope. He tells Iron Axe that it's time to finish cleaning up the rest. If any of the chief knights are still alive, he wants them taken prisoner for questioning. He also instructs Sylvie to go with Iron Axe to keep an eye on the enemy soldiers, making sure no one gets away. The charming witch Sylvie quickly agrees to the prince's instructions. She now understands why the prince is so confident in publicly sheltering the witches. With such powerful military capabilities, even the church's divine punishment army might struggle to overcome him. If Princess Tilly could wield such formidable weapons, she might not need to hide anymore, and the enemy could find it nearly impossible to launch a successful assault. Iron Axe finally returns from his mission and reports back. He's managed to capture only 2 knights. The first introduces himself as Duke Snake and immediately begs the prince to allow him to send a message to his family, promising a huge ransom in return. The second knight introduces himself as Edward Shield from the Shield family in the northern region, and he too claims that his family is willing to pay a ransom for his release. With a terrifying tone, the prince asks them if these 2 are the ones who launched this attack. Duke Snake quickly speaks up, stating that their captain, Duke Vincent, was the one in charge, but he perished in the battle. He pleads with the prince to release their handcuffs, insisting that he wishes to be treated humanely before his ransom is arranged. The prince, however, makes it clear that he's not interested in a ransom. All he wants is the main goal of the attack and Timothy's next move. If they provide this information, he'll let them go. The 2 knights apologize and firmly state that they can't divulge any details. They've sworn loyalty to Timothy and refuse to betray their king. We can tell that the prince is really bothered by their response, so he simply turns on his heel and starts walking away. He tells Iron Axe that the fate of these knights is up to him, and makes it clear that he doesn't care what happens to them, as long as he gets the information he needs. Iron Axe quickly agrees, telling his soldiers to take the 2 knights away. Before they leave, the prince reminds the captain that once the interrogation is over, the 2 knights should be counted among the casualties. After all, they brought this on themselves by invading the western region and involving civilians in their mess. The next day in Border Town, the prince learns that the soldiers they defeated were just the first wave of Timothy's forces. Iron Axe confirms that this fits Timothy Wimbledon's strategy, revealing that Timothy is sending waves of refugee armies to attack the western region, using similar tactics to those employed at Clearwater Port. The prince asks if all the soldiers are civilians. Iron Axe replies that it's a mix. Some are criminals and troublemakers among the refugees. He explains that Timothy captures these people, makes false promises to pacify them, and then forces them to take the pills. This way, they fall entirely under Timothy's control, and Timothy needs more pills to keep them under his influence and manage their pain and desires. The prince feels a pang of sadness for those forced to take the pills, because the pills only offer a temporary reprieve, delaying an inevitable death, and he knows that even one pill means they're beyond saving. Iron Axe agrees, noting that Timothy never mentioned the pill's side effects to those people, and everyone was tricked into believing they'd receive status and rewards after fighting. Duke Vincent had underestimated the defenses of Border Town and thought that 1,000 drugged commoners would be enough to take down the Border Town. Iron Axe further reveals that Duke Snake spilled more details during the interrogation. Timothy had planned to split the commoners into groups to attack the town, while keeping an eye on their defenses. The prince makes it clear he won't let any enemy soldiers get away this time. Since Duke Snake was part of the first wave, he asks if they know anything about the next waves. Iron Axe shares that they didn't get many details about the second wave, but Duke Snake did mention it would be much larger than the first. The prince is disappointed to see Timothy squandering valuable lives as cannon fodder. It's hard to believe his brother could be so reckless with such a costly gamble. The prince then points out that once the Demons of Months arrive, the entire western region will be covered in snow. If they're going to attack, it needs to happen before winter hits. This means he plans to drag out the battle. Iron Axe asks if they should send a messenger. The prince thinks it won't be very effective. To make Timothy rethink his strategy, they'll need to cut his forces and show him that sending commoners into battle won't work against the western region. The prince spreads out the map and explains the urgency of their next moves. He explains that he was too slow and cautious in spreading news about the western region and recruiting more people. To cut off Timothy's options for gathering commoners for his forces, they need to recruit and interact with commoners, just as they did with the refugees in the capital. He emphasizes that the war-torn southern region is the most critical area to address next, followed by the northern region. He plans to release the prisoners to send a clear message, ensuring that Timothy's forces won't attempt another futile assault. Iron Axe raises a concern that releasing the captives would expose their strategies and weaponry. However, the prince reassures him that Timothy will remain in the dark about the specifics of their weapons' strength and manufacturing capabilities. The released captives will only reveal the extent of the weapon's power and not the intricate details of their operations. Additionally, these captives will carry a warning letter to Timothy, which will serve as both a strategic and psychological advantage. Iron Axe looks puzzled, so the prince clarifies his strategy. He plans to announce a specific date for a major offensive and then lay siege on the capital during that time. This will not involve the First Army, but rather an unexpected aerial assault by the witches. He explains that while the chance of actually killing Timothy is slim, the primary objective is to create a significant psychological impact. By demonstrating their ability to strike directly at the heart of Timothy's power, they will shake his confidence and destabilize his rule. The goal is to make Timothy feel threatened and uncertain about his position, thereby achieving a successful operation through fear and disruption. Well, that was a lot to take in. I'm sure this episode was more dialogue-oriented than action-packed, and we didn't see much progress on the industrialization front. Nonetheless, it was a great episode. I guess having character development and compelling narration is what makes Release the Witch special, regardless of how dialogue-heavy the series is. I enjoyed narrating it. I hope you enjoyed it as well, so leave the feedback down in the comments.